Okay, super. Let's kick off then. Um, Super. Well, thank you very, very much, everyone, for joining us. Which is for a really obviously important topic that's really coming to the fore more and more now. It's because of that, it's actually one of the areas that we've added to the WGI survey for this year, along with questions around just transition. And we know, of course, that it's an increasingly important topic for investors. Data companies submit to those new questions that will be released in March next year, along with our findings report. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens, what's revealed in the data. I'm sure we've all read some sort of quite scary or quite sort of intense stories about how companies are using technology, workforce surveillance, automation, AI, etc., especially by some big companies, big name companies. But what we want to do here is have a bit more of a balanced discussion about the current state of play. So I'm very happy to say that I'm joined by a couple of really interesting speakers, and in a second I'll get them to introduce themselves. But then we're going to move on to a panel discussion, and we have some time for Q&A at the end. Please do feel free to send your questions whenever you like through the chat function or the Q&A function. If it's really pertinent to what we're saying just then, I might ask it as part of the panel discussion, but otherwise I'll save it to the end. And we did actually have a couple of people send a question through the registration form as well. So thank you to those very prepared people. We'll tackle those in the Q&A at the end. Lovely. So if we could set the scene a bit, I'm going to ask each speaker to introduce themselves, their organisations, their priorities in this area. So perhaps, Tom, we could start with you as you're unmuted. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, thanks, Rosie. Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Tom Powdrill. I'm Director of Stewardship at PIRC. So just by way of introduction, yeah, I mean, we're kind of an advisor to institutional investors on environmental, social and governance issues. Spend a lot of time looking at workforce-related issues in particular. And I guess in terms of like this discussion, there's been a couple of different areas that we've been interested in that I think we can probably delve into a bit more detail. So firstly, I think like generally, we've spent quite a lot of time thinking about sort of workforce and human rights issues in relation to technology in general and technology firms. So I'm sure other folks will have done this as well, but looking at things such as use of facial recognition software. So like really interesting example at Thomson Reuters a couple of years ago where there was a jailed up proposal specifically on that subject, and Thomson Reuters using that software with the US Immigration Service and the links there. Looked a little bit at algorithmic discrimination as well, and then there's the kind of issue around like general data rights, access to data, and also compensation, I guess, to data as well. Then on a sort of like related area, which I think is quite, we've spent quite a lot of time by looking at competition policy, and there you kind of really get into the way that algorithms, machine learning, etc., have really changed the terms of the sort of it changed the sort of whole nature of enforcement there. So you get to the point where there can be collusion between what are known as algorithmic collusion without any kind of human intervention. That's tended to focus on kind of collusion around price setting, but I've always struck me that again, when we've looked at issues around market concentration and market power, there's obviously as well as monopoly, there's monopsony as well, like buying power, and that obviously has an impact in terms of the labour market. So again, I've sort of been interested in that as an area and been thinking a little bit about like is there other potential issues around there as well in terms of like how technology might directly impact in terms of like wage setting. So just by way of intro.
Lovely, thanks, Tom. Super. So thanks, Tom. Yeah, obviously lots going on. Kyle, if you could give us a bit of background about you and Nossa, that'd be super. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, Rosie. So I'm Kyle. I'm an account executive here at Nossa Data. Nossa Data is primarily an ESG and data management tool, specifically designed around corporate pain points. So really what we do is try and leverage technology as a way of improving how companies go about their ESG reporting. So trying to remove the mundane, duplicative, admin-intensive tasks so that companies have more time to actually focus on plugging their gaps, meeting the right methodologies, and really meeting the increasing amount of ESG reporting, regulatory reporting that they need to do, which is often stifled by the kind of traditional longhand Excel email chain forms. And I guess our relation to sort of workforce topics comes from us being the exclusive platform provider for the WDI. So we work very closely with the WDI and Rosie and all the lovely Share Action team members as the technology partner. So all companies who report to the WDI do so via our tool. So that's been a really, really great opportunity for us to really delve into what those pain points are that sort of major publicly listed companies are trying to solve when it comes to making their ESG reporting more efficient. And again, really just trying to leverage technology in a way that enhances everything that kind of might otherwise stifle reporting to the WDI or any other kind of ESG reports like CDP or preparing for the ESRS/CSRD, however you want to call it, things like that. So it's a bit of background on us.
Lovely, thanks, Kyle. And yeah, as Kyle says, we work very closely with the Nossa Data team, and they are phenomenal, and the platform is incredible. Lovely. Okay, thank you. Good. So we've all got a bit more sort of background and context. To get a bit more into the meat of the topic, then, what do we see as the biggest risks for workers that technology, automation, AI, etc. present? And then I suppose more positively, what are the opportunities? Perhaps, Carl, we can start with you and your sort of broader ESG perspective.
Yeah, sure. So I think, a great example for how and why it might be considered a risk is the fact that it's included in this year's WDI. So technology being a material risk for the workforce is something that's increasing, especially as things like AI develop. And I think it's ultimately really, really can't stress enough how important it is that how kind of AI and technology works and can be implemented is really understood at a sort of senior management / board level, as well as throughout the company, really to ensure that they're not becoming overly reliant on AI to maintain or improve operations, especially if it would eventually mean kind of downsizing areas of their business. So for me, that presents a real kind of material risk in terms of sort of workforce satisfaction, how they end up training their workforce, what sort of operations are done by sort of full-time or part-time or temporary workers versus what's done by a machine. There's a ton of different factors that sort of come from that. That being said, though, I think if a company kind of implements technology responsibly, then it could be a really huge opportunity for corporate self-improvement and sort of effectiveness. So, I mean, in my opinion, I don't think AI is, despite being very advanced, it's nowhere near being ready to replace humans in the workforce, at least as things stand. And it's also worth noting that, particularly around sort of AI, however much AI grows, there's pretty much just an equal amount of anti-AI growth. So things that can detect AI I'll give an example. Something that I hear a lot is people have sort of expressed a kind of fear that AI will end up writing their ESG reports and sort of whole ESG teams will be kind of downsized because of that. But, I believe that it can certainly help ESG reports get done faster, but would never pass a kind of anti-AI detection. And in theory, if we take it to the extreme that all companies are using AI to write all of their ESG reports, you basically end up with the same verbiage across every single company's reports. They'd probably never go beyond sort of surface level statements. And then investors, as a consequence, would not really get much of a picture about your business or your sustainability practices or how you treat your workforce, anything like that. So to go back to where I think it's positive, I don't think it's there yet to really be able to do all the really positive, integral things that humans do. Like it wouldn't be able to manage data holders throughout an organization, provide a really deep understanding of how the business operates, sort of consider exactly how they want their data presented based on feedback from investors or ratings agencies. And so it could be really useful for optimizing the time spent by an employee away from sort of mundane practices. It could provide templates that mean it's faster to work through things like ESG reports. But ultimately, it just means that it would save more time for workers to action integral aspects of their roles. So I think that's where the main opportunity lies. But then, yeah, as long as they're doing it responsibly, that should hopefully avoid some of the risk related to it. Yeah, that's where I stand on for sure.
Amazing, thanks, Carl. Yeah, I think you're right. We're all looking for standardization, but not to the extent where everyone's ESG report is exactly the same because of AI. Tom, what are you seeing from your angle?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would totally agree with a lot of what Carl said actually. And again, I suppose maybe one thing to just sort of like start this as well is just think about like this is, maybe think of AI as a subset of technology, right? And this debate about technology and how it affects workers gets repeated generation after generation. And lots of previous eras of technological development, people have worried about the impact on workers and particularly like unemployment, right? And actually like structural unemployment, etc. And by and large, that has not been borne out at an aggregate level. So I'll explain that in a minute. But basically, certain types of roles have been replaced or become less important, but we've found other things that we need doing, and new types of jobs have been created, and therefore it's everyone's guessing a little bit at the extent to which this is really going to sort of replace workers, for example. That said, obviously in some specific cases, you're someone that's done a certain type of job for your entire career and it gets replaced or downgraded, you may not have the opportunity to switch. And I think we do need to think through those kind of questions. They are difficult. But like I say, we have been through this before. Another thing I think as well, again, to sort of echo something Carl said, I mean, I kind of keep thinking as well about Elon Musk has been saying for each year for about the past 5 years, there's going to be 1 million robo taxis on the roads, right? And I appreciate like self-driving vehicles are a complex technology. They keep saying it and it doesn't happen. And I think it definitely will happen, but it will not necessarily happen in the sort of timeframes that our worst sort of fears may not be borne out. Another thing I'd say as well is that, we should think in all this sort of stuff, again, thinking AI as a subset of technology, I think in two different ways, right? It's not just necessarily as well like replacement, like or elimination of jobs. It can be like augmentation of jobs, and exactly like Carl said, like some of this can be taking mundane stuff out of the day-to-day work, and so you're actually focusing on more valuable stuff, more rewarding stuff for you personally, more valuable stuff for the organization you work for. So I think that is, that's an opportunity. I mean, clearly, again, just another sort of anecdotal example you hear in terms of like maybe in sort of legal sector, AI can like basically assess a case law or like find common themes quite easily. It's not going to replace human judgment in that area, but it can knock out something. Obviously legal clerks are going to become, I guess, less important, right? But it means the kind of human judgment aspect of it more important. But the one thing I should acknowledge is that there are other people out there who do think it's going to be fundamentally different this time. We should just sort of like acknowledge that. I mean, Daniel Susskind, like really interesting, like economist, has written this book, like A World Without Work. He does argue that it may be different this time, but personally, I kind of feel we've been through this argument many times before, and it hasn't panned out. So I'm sort of perhaps more on the optimistic end of it.
Thanks, Tom. No, I think you're right. It's definitely happening more gradually than some sort of scaremongers or very enthusiastic people would have us believe. And I think that is absolutely a good thing for everyone to acclimatise to the technology to improve and stabilise. Lovely. So based on all of that, taking all of that into consideration, what would you like to see companies doing to adapt to technological developments? And anything sort of about how we can get stakeholders working collaboratively on this, because as we've you've both touched on, this is something that affects a lot of people, and can be quite emotive. I know when we talked about this earlier, you wanted to make some terms clear. You've touched on labour augmentation. Is there anything else you'd want to add there?
I think there's a bunch of things that companies could do, and maybe we'll come on to again, like maybe what some emerging investor expectations might be there. But again, thinking about like concerns that people have about the technology. For example, like algorithmic bias is like obviously a key thing like out there in the world that people, and there is an emerging kind of case law as well. I think you've seen, for example, definitely sort of like perhaps more advertising, things like that. You've seen examples where, like certain types of ads are shown to certain types of people. And like, obviously, again, that has potential sort of applications in the recruitment market. So I think in terms of, there are opportunities there as well, by the way, because I do think some like automation or like, application of AI here could actually eliminate some degree of bias, right? We might have less older white guys like myself getting jobs if we use this technology smarter. That's on the plus side, but I do think that stuff needs to be thought through. Equally, I think in terms of like if we are looking at a future where some types of roles get like eliminated, or people have to retrain, who's going to do that? Our company is willing to do that. They may also need to intervene a bit more in terms of like, I can imagine like the educational policy, right? For example, why do we, like in this future where like a machine can do so much in terms of like information storage, retrieval, analysis, are we teaching people the right things, like in terms of like regurgitating facts rather than sort of critical thinking? I kind of think as well, maybe employers need to think then about like, if we're not going to need that type of skill anymore, we should be talking about that, and what happens then in terms of educational policy. And then in terms of like how we work more collaboratively, again, I'm a big advocate of trade unionism, and I kind of think this is an area where actually that the unions have a really important role to play, because definitely people within PLCs and other organisations do worry about these issues. Lots of HR people worry about them, both in terms of the risk side, in terms of like legal risk from discrimination cases, but they're generally worried about like, what's this going to do to our workforce? But someone does need to speak on behalf of that workforce as well. And I think there's definitely a role for like unions and employers to get their heads together on this stuff and sort of agree some common terms. And I think there probably would be quite a few areas where they would both feel there are issues that could be nailed down. But that's something I would definitely like to see in this area.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think everyone's voice needs to be considered for this to happen properly, fairly, and for it not to cause massive disruptions. And absolutely pipeline planning as well. I think you're right, with skills within schools is going to be a different issue in the future to the ones that we're looking for now. Absolutely. Carl, I know when we spoke about this earlier, you wanted to talk about some sort of limitations around AI and how that is how companies need to adapt to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rosie. And I totally agree with everything Tom said as well. Yeah, I mean, technology in general, I think is, it's bigger than just AI, but I think that's probably one of the biggest developments that is happening within the technological space at the moment, with sort of the advent of GPT and things like that. But I think it's always worth considering that sort of what the human perspective is. So the way I'd sort of like to see companies adapt is sort of with more of a full understanding of what technology they're using, how it works, what they're using it for and why, and don't become too over-reliant on it. So I like to use the example, which I think I used before, is kind of you can leverage AI to maybe find gaps in your ESG reporting faster, but realistically, you probably end up with an absolutely rubbish ESG report if you were to solely write it using AI, because an AI will never know sort of the ins and outs of your business, will never know which exact employees will be the exact data holder for this, and this. that kind of relies on, at the very least, human intervention, if not kind of a deeper kind of human perspective. That AI is just not there yet. But really, how I can see sort of companies working collaboratively on this. One would be kind of in the ESG kind of perspective. As we touched on earlier, technology is an increasingly material topic. So whenever you're doing a materiality assessment, which most companies are doing at the moment in light of the CSRD, consider how technology is affecting your sustainability performance, your financial performance, your workforce sort of related topic performance as well, and how that can also relate back onto the technology itself. And also just have really robust systems in place so that if a new technology enters your workforce, that it's tracked somewhere. So things like ISO certifications are really important for that, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. You're protected against things like data leaks, which can have sort of massively material effects on an organization as well, especially if they're kind of unexpected. And so, yeah, just keep track of everything, don't become over reliant on it, and kind of involve everyone in at least a sort of general oversight of how the technology is going to be used and implemented over time, so that you can adapt to things faster if anything sort of changes, which it often does in the world of technology. Yeah.
Lovely, thanks, Carl. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Data security is going to be even more of an issue in the future, and good prep is essential. Absolutely. Lovely. Okay. So there is obviously as yet a distinct lack of regulation in this area. And how do we think companies are handling this? How should they be handling this? Tom, I know you had some thoughts around policy statements that are already out there.
Well, yeah, I mean, just a flag, really. I mean, again, sort of some people are thinking about this, and again, like I know there's a sort of there's a task force been established recently on AI, which is like TUC, CIPD, etc. And just some of the ideas in there I thought were like worthy of just like further exploration. I mean, I guess on just on your specific point about regulation, Rosie, I think they were talking about like amendments to GDPR and the Equalities Act. I think like basically that would be more kind of getting into I guess the sort of algorithmic discrimination sort of stuff. I think maybe as well there's a role more generally as well for I think another sort of idea that's been advanced. I think it's role for is allowing people access to review of it of like algorithms. I know it's a complex topic, but it just does feel if like part of the process that leads to you getting or not getting a job, for example, is there should at least be some sort of option there. Or if it's, I don't know, maybe it's part of a disciplinary procedure or something like that. That would be an area I think that looks worth exploring. In terms of other policy positions, I mean, certainly I've seen a couple from investors. I think most recently Norges Bank put something out about 6 weeks ago just on like responsible AI. It's quite short, but it does kind of show that people are thinking about it. And again, the kind of things, I mean, some of it is kind of like pretty much what we as investors and investor advisors ask for a lot, but it's kind of like clear, like board level responsibility, like disclosure of like risk management processes around new technology and how to. I guess an area I think as well is, and I think it would be picked up in kind of like securities like regulation in any case, but I think as well like companies need to sort of disclose potential risks arising for this when they become aware of them, and that might be, obviously like any sort of like legal cases that are going through the system, because I think everyone's going to need to keep an eye on those and see what form they take. But then more generally, I think as well, just like risks that they see in a more general sense from new technology.
Super, thanks, Tom. Yeah, no, again, I totally agree. There is a steep learning curve to come, and I think absolutely, though, any sort of court case around this is going to be hugely influential at this stage. So yeah, really interested to see how that that kind of thing pans out. But also, obviously, as you say, very encouraging that there are some investors, there are some companies that are leading the way on this, and that people are thinking about it and setting it down in black and white, which is great. Lovely. Okay, so what do we think then specifically that investors should? Oh, sorry, Carl, did you want to add something there? Sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, I could maybe just add that I think that the EU is passing a sort of AI law. I think they first proposed it in 2021, but should be coming out sometime in the near future as well. But I think just to really echo what Tom was saying as well, that there are companies kind of leading the way when it comes to how they use technology. And so if a company is unsure about how to do that themselves. A really useful thing that I always recommend to companies is just look at what the leaders are doing. So just benchmark what they're doing against what you're doing, and kind of give yourself something to aim for. I think a lot of it as well just comes down to kind of common sense best practices as well. So what to you is using technology responsibly in the face of there being little to no regulation on it. It can really be up to you. So you could also very easily become a leader in that area as well for others to benchmark against.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Carl. Yeah, it may be a great opportunity to become a leader. Absolutely. Lovely. Okay, super. So if we could think maybe from the investor angle specifically, what should investors be looking out for in this area? Tom, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different things here that I think are worth worth sort of flagging. So maybe like just okay. So if we took the kind of like quite a negative position on this, and like it did like this kind of technology does lead to like it's some degree of like elimination of labor, potentially, or or more positively say it enables us to become more productive, you know, either way. So there's some like there's cost savings for companies. Like, what do you want to do with that money? I mean, again, because you could think like then companies that are able to like really harness this technology could either like throw off more cash to investors, or they could invest it in R&D. So I guess there's a question there, like what, like if we see companies really gunning on this topic, right, like really going for it, like what do we want them to do with whatever sort of savings they make out of it? That's one bit. I think the other interesting thing that's actually like in terms of like the flip side of some of this stuff is like, so say it starts to this, like we start to eliminate certain types of roles, or at least sort of like reduce the human involvement in them. I think it's likely to the flip side there. Just I think it's likely to like result in increased demand for like softer skills, right? And I think probably more sort of you can imagine roles in I guess sort of like sort of stuff that that really needs a human to do it. Like it's like personal sort of stuff. I don't know, obviously like social care, things like that. It might be quite a boon in a way in that bit of the labour market, in the sense that that is only I think that's only going to increase in demand in any case. But that's the stuff that you really can't where you really can't replace people, and therefore that's good for the workforce there. But then I think also then for investors we should be thinking like, where are the companies like that, and therefore they might be the ones we want to think about as ones to sort of like invest in the future. That's sort of one thing I think I would also sort of think about. And then finally, Carl's already covered us. Again, I would sort of echo the point. Like, there's a bit of a challenge back to investors here as well. It's like, all right, how are we using the technology? Now, day to day, we're all already using some of this, right? I mean, in terms of like automating some of the text we use, or even sort of really trivial stuff like prompts in your email, like to auto-complete it, or little design ideas in PowerPoint, and all that kind of stuff. It's already happening, right? That's the trivial end of it. But if we do start using more automation to kind of like say undertake company research, or like help with the reporting back to clients, like are we being upfront about that? Are we clear with our clients? Like there's not a human doing this work. This is being generated by a machine basically. I don't know. Carl may know much more than I do on that front, but to date, I don't think I've really seen much acknowledgement of that. Perhaps maybe in ESG raters, right? But beyond that, I don't I don't think people talk a lot about how they're using this stuff yet.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think it is not obvious yet, but I agree with you that it would be amazing if AI technology frees up workers to join social care, healthcare, senior care, who are obviously crying out for people if it can be well paid and good conditions as well. Lovely, Carl. I know that you want to add a bit more about how investors should be using AI and what you've seen.
Yeah, so I mean, most of this insight comes from honestly dealing with corporates and ratings agencies and kind of getting their feedback on sort of what their experience has been. But I mean, every ESG ratings agency, for example, uses AI to scrape a company's data sources before an analyst ever takes a look at that. And I mean, Tom might know better than me exactly how much credence an investor gives to a ratings agency, but we typically see that MSCI, Sustainalytics, ISS have a huge chunk of their revenue comes from the investor side, sort of buying subscriptions to view that data. And so what I would probably say for investors to look out for is that it is using AI. Oftentimes that AI would then inform whatever an analyst looks for. So if something has been missed by that AI, it's highly likely that an analyst has missed that too. And then companies often spend hours, if not days, having to then validate that data with the different ratings agencies as well to say, no, you got this wrong. No, you're missing this data. Actually, this is from 2020. We updated our policy last year. There's a ton of back and forth there. So what I'd maybe encourage investors to do is take a bit more of an active approach when engaging companies, particularly on their sort of ESG ratings. So if you are finding that a exact policy is missing, ask your company for that policy, and if they still can't provide it, then it's a true gap. But I just wouldn't 100% rely on the data that you're getting, which is primarily through AI, because it's never 100% accurate. And then I guess on the company side, would also be something to note for your investors is that you can actually do a lot to kind of own the narrative and ensure that you have a bit of an easier time when engaging with those ratings agencies as well. So knowing full well that they are using AI to pick up your data, don't do things which AI can't pick up. So don't use JPEGs or pictographs to highlight your best data points. Try and work in, it's a bit of a hack, but work in some of the keywords if it's data that you're already reporting on that matches the kind of methodologies. So I won't name any names, but just as an example, one of our clients is a CDP A-lister, and a ratings agency marked them down for not having a climate action plan because they didn't have the exact wording, "We have a climate action plan," in their reports, which doesn't make any sense. They're a CDP A-lister. But it's just those little things which can be a really quick win and make it a much easier time for your investors to find your data. But then you can also publish, on your investor relations portal, things like that, kind of what your 2 cents are on the rating you've been given, if there's areas that you can improve and areas that you can't improve. And so that's another thing that investors can encourage their companies to do as well if they're not doing that already, or something that companies can do to kind of get ahead of those sort of requests too. Yeah.
Lovely, thanks, Carl. No, always really good to get some life hacks. So I'm sure good, handy, practical advice. And I think, again, you're absolutely right. And I think that links really nicely back to what Tom was saying about the human touch will continue to be very important going forward. It really, really will. Lovely. Okay, so to finish on a sort of a proactive note as much as possible, what do we think the future of technology in the workforce looks like? Is there a sort of a summary statement that I think maybe Carl, you might be able to make?
Yeah, so I guess I'm fairly optimistic about the future of technology in the workforce. I think it remains to be seen kind of how that develops, and I think different industries will adapt better than others. Not going to name particular industries or others, but I always like to give the example of Google. So Google search, it's basically AI in its truest form. You have a database of knowledge. The person inputs keywords and then gets the results. By no means did that ever make kind of researchers obsolete. We still have universities, we still have libraries. It just meant that things could get done a bit faster, but it always relied on having that kind of human aspect to verify that that data is accurate, to dig deeper into it, to get results out of that data. So that's where I really see kind of technology moving forward is kind of a sort of harmony between the efficiency side, which can be done by technology, and then the sort of accuracy, qualitative side as well, which I think no technology is even close to getting there. But it all really comes down to how that technology develops, whether we're responsible as a society in how we kind of adapt to it and bring it on. So I'm optimistic, but yeah, nothing is certain, particularly in the space of technology and ESG. But yeah, fingers crossed.
Amazing, thanks, Carl. Yeah, a great analogy. I think you're absolutely right. There's I don't think anyone would disagree with you the fact that Google searches aren't just automatically a good thing. You still need to sift that information and trust your sort of find good sources and use a library ultimately. Lovely. Okay, so let's move on to Q&A. We've had one come through chat, and as I mentioned at the beginning, we had a few sent through beforehand when people registered, but I'll tackle the one that came through live first. So it's just saying, at this stage, is it not that we need to support workers whose jobs may not be taken by AI, but rather by other workers with knowledge of AI? Think mid-level programmers or anyone whose job can be made more efficient if they were to use AI to augment their work. Tom, Carl, I don't mind if either of you have something you want to say in response to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is exactly what both Carl was sort of saying early on, isn't it? It's basically, I think there's a bit of both, to be frank. But I think, yeah, I mean, like the optimistic view of this is definitely that this is exactly to that question, right? We should be thinking of this as like augmentation rather than labour replacement, right? It can help people do their jobs more productively, and therefore it should be a benefit. I think that again gets to that broader question about like technology really ought to be neutral, right? It's just like I think as investors we're always thinking about kind of like ownership and control, right? Those are the key concepts we deal with. I think the same applies exactly to technology, right? It can be utilized if people seek to utilize it to replace people, or it can be used to kind of improve the way we work in a more positive way. And I think to this question, it's exactly I hope that's the way companies are thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where it's really key that companies take retraining, reskilling really seriously and have a proper plan for how that's going to work and how it's going to affect their particular business, their particular sector. I do think from our conversations with companies, I think it is on the agenda of lots of organizations. There's just a lot of uncertainty at the moment about exactly what is going to happen. But I think lots of companies are keen to do the right thing by their existing workforce and making sure that they can keep people on, especially Tom, as you referenced at the beginning of the call, especially those people who have been there for a really long time. They don't want to lose those people who have that institutional knowledge if they've been in a workplace for 20 years or something. Kyle, sorry, did you want to add something in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on it just then, Rosie, by sort of training and things like that as well. I mean, the question from Luda references kind of programmers and things like that who already kind of know how to use AI. But I think that's a really important thing when it comes to training as well, is kind of relying on those people who kind of already know how to use it, to kind of disseminate that knowledge throughout, and then how they then leverage AI to kind of augment their own work. I think is also really important as well, because I think a lot of the AI that exists in the world at the moment is prompt technology. So if I were to write into ChatGPT, write this code, it would be absolutely rubbish and wouldn't work because I know absolutely nothing about coding. But it still would rely on that kind of first point of call to actually prompt the AI to give you something and then to verify if that something works or not. So I think there's definitely a ton of space to support people who already have that knowledge with AI, and then a ton of room of opportunity as well to support people who don't know how to use AI so that it's leveraged in the correct way and that they importantly understand how it's helping them, beyond just the fact that they're getting their work done a bit quicker. I think it's important to know too.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I always think there's a maybe a sort of aspect of generational change as well. I know people who are 10 years younger than me have just a much better grounding in basic coding that I just have no idea about. So those skills are, filtering through already to the younger people. And fingers crossed that can be developed in the older workforce as well. Super. So yes, thank you for sending through that question. Anyone else have a live question? Please do feel free to send it either in the chat or the Q&A. But just in the meantime, I'm going to go to the questions that were sent earlier through the registration form. Okay, so one of them, I think we've probably already covered it. Just that overall, do the speakers think technology is going to be a good thing for the workforce? I think, Kyle, you sort of handled that in the last sort of question we covered. So overall, I think we're definitely of the opinion that if handled properly, it is a good thing. Is there anything you want to add there? No, that was a good summary. Yeah, cool. Next one, a very practical one. What does the WDI mean by workforce surveillance? So we have a glossary for all the terms we use in the survey. So I'll send a link to that in the follow-up materials. I don't want to sort of read out the definition now. I think that would be quite dry, but I promise you we do have a definition. And then just the last one, will technology help business planning? Really help business planning. So that's quite a broad question. I think we've touched on lots of different aspects of it. I don't know if there's anything, Carl or Tom, you would want to add to what you've already said in the content of the webinar. I think maybe the questioner is trying to get at whether this is help plan for the future, maybe help react to situations, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tom touched on this earlier with kind of how companies might adapt to it and not becoming too kind of entrenched in a technology that you then are kind of stuck with it. But I definitely do think that, and sorry, Tom, if I paraphrase you incorrectly there, feel free to correct me. But I do think it depends how you really want it to be used. I think that's the good thing about technology as things stand. It's pretty malleable depending on exactly what your objective is. But in the context of ESG kind of business planning, it can be really helpful in just, for example, something that Nossa Data does, don't mean to plug us too much, but scraping all of your public data sources to see kind of exactly what topics you're speaking about, and then benchmarking that against running the same algorithm on your peers' public data as well, and just seeing where your gaps are. So that's a really quick win that could help kind of identify what initiatives you can start moving forward, what you might be doing more of but not saying enough of, things like that. So like really quick wins. But I definitely don't think technology would ever be able to plan your whole business strategy for the next 5 years or anything like that. Like I said before, you'll never have AI or any kind of technology will never have a full understanding of how that works. But it could potentially augment kind of bringing people together. I mean, just thinking of the fact that we're on a Zoom chat right now, that could be a way to get tons of different people from across the organization to give input at once. Sending out kind of big Google surveys is another way. So there's ways to leverage technology for the benefit of it. But I don't think it will ever be, you can only use technology or you won't be using any technology at all. I don't think that would happen. Yeah, apologies, Tom, if I paraphrased you incorrectly.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Carl. I think that it's got to add to, again, the human element of knowing the business well, knowing the workforce, implementing everyone's or integrating everyone's voice into that is pretty crucial. Lovely. Okay, so that was all questions we had sent through beforehand. We haven't had any more questions, live questions, as it were. So we can probably say goodbye there, unless anyone just got some last minute thoughts. I don't want to cut anyone off in the questions. Sorry. No. Lovely. Okay, well, if you do have questions afterwards, you can definitely send me an email and I can pass it on to Carl or Tom, and we'll put the recording up on the Share Action YouTube channel very, very shortly. Thank you very, very, very much, everyone. We'll give you back 11 minutes of your day. Thank you very much, Carl. Thank you very, very much, Tom.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Tom. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.